Thank you, Dale. And good morning to all of you. It is a beautiful day at a beautiful place. And as we dive in today, it's always such a pleasure for me to have a chance to come and be part of this event and to watch it grow the way it does every year. And I would start out just by saying, and you've heard me say it before, those of you that have been here, I mean, what a jewel for the industry that this Stalker unit is, and obviously for the university and for the state. And I just think we need to thank Dale and Bill and all the Stalker unit alumni and everybody that has been a part of this 25-year legacy. Thank you, Dale. And with that, what a wonderful topic to bring some expertise to share with you. You know, depending on how you look at it, I think some folks, we could almost argue that this growth of dairy beef production in some ways has really been revolutionary, hasn't it? I mean, we've had dairy cattle around forever. They've been part of beef production forever. But the way this has evolved has really changed kind of some production flow and some thoughts and maybe even who's going to lead who as we go down the road. And so we're very fortunate to have this panel with us today, and we'll start down on this end. We'll have them introduce themselves to you and kind of what they do and their involvement in dairy beef production, and we'll go from there. The other thing I'll say at the outset is we want this very much to be an interactive discussion. So as we go along, if you have a question, sing out and raise your hand, and let's go ahead and start making this a conversation. Okay?
Yeah, thanks, Wes. Good morning. I would concur with you. Thanks for having us, Dale. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to be part of this. And once again, what a beautiful facility. And so just appreciate the chance to be here. As Wes said, my name is Jason Shamburg, and we have a facility at Deerfield, Kansas, which is about 14 miles west of Garden City in southwest Kansas. We are primarily a calf ranch and dairy heifer development facility. We've got just a little bit shy of 80,000 head there, of which about 7,000 at this point in time are beef on dairy crosses, and have some plans to expand and get further into that line of things. Of our facility, about half the animals, about 44,000, would be in the calf ranch, and the remaining 35,000 or so would be in heifer development, which we would consider 6 months and older. So basically, in a nutshell, we bring in day-old dairy calves and/or beef on dairy cross calves from about 11 different states. We've got about 47 different farms we work with. Usually, they're, when I say day-old, 3 to 4 days of age in general. Weighing about 85 pounds. And the majority of the animals leave, weighing around 1,300 pounds as a 7-month-old pregnant heifer or a springer, going back home into production. Within that, naturally, we have, particularly with today's industry, the presence of sex semen. We've got a fair amount of beef on dairy crosses and demand to do more. It's obviously, a very exciting segment of the industry. We've got a lot of dairymen that once considered a Holstein bull calf as really a byproduct of their operation, and now it is it's a really important part of their operation economically. So it's been fascinating to see that grow and develop, and so looking forward to visiting with everybody more about that today.
Thank you, Jason. I didn't realize that they needed to bring in the good-looking crew from Southwest Kansas to really up the ante here at Stalker Day. So we appreciate you having us, but we probably do take the cake for this drive. And my name is Tera Barnhardt, and I'm a practicing veterinarian in Southwest Kansas. The majority of my business is really on the beef side of things, hoof to slaughter. So I deal with a lot of day-old baby calves at calf ranches, and then from about that 400-pound mark to about 650, several grow yard businesses that take those dairy dairy beef calves to 650, and then deal with several finishing yards that would be just your classic beef on dairy and native cattle both. I do about 50% of my time with dairy cows, which I remember distinctly doing an internship while I was at Kansas State and calling my mentor and saying, I'm never going to be a dairy veterinarian. And that's one way to ensure that you're going to be a dairy veterinarian. So part of my practice evolved into that after I transitioned out of a staff veterinary position with a large cattle feeding operation. And part of that was to make sure that I stayed home with my young family and stayed in Southwest Kansas and kept my roots there. And that has worked out to have a high learning curve, but a very enjoyable career. So I'm excited to be up here and share with you all today.
There's a lot more depth on these two that they didn't share. I'm David Clawson. I'm with High Plains Ponderosa Dairy, which is right northeast of Liberal. Grew up cow-calf, row crop farmer, and a bunch of us decided we'd get together and show those California guys how to dairy back about 25 years ago. So those of you that are in school, education isn't free, is it? We went through a number of years of education, and we've learned quite a bit, but we've got a tremendous team together now. And we actually started doing some of this beef on dairy in 2019 and retained ownership on some. We're going through an expansion phase, so we went back to the sex semen on the heifer side to produce heifers, but we're working our way back into the beef on dairy as we speak.
Okay, thank you. You know, to kind of set the stage, I'm wondering if you could, because depending on what everybody here, if you're like me, I know bits and pieces about dairy on beef and the evolution, etc. But if you would just give us your perspectives on how you've seen this evolve, the interest in it, and where you see that interest going. Is it growing? Is it static? Those kinds of things. And what made me think of that, Jason, was your comment on, just the kind of rudiments of gee whiz sex semen. And now all of a sudden we could say, here's this portion of the herd that we can do something with it.
Yeah, it clearly makes a ton of sense, right? At the end of the day, and as you said, Wes, I mean, the onset of sex semen was really the precursor that set the plate and the ability for the industry to be able to breed, quote unquote, that other half of the cow herd to something black, primarily an Angus genetics these days. I guess I would, kind of metaphorically, I've always kind of likened it a little bit to the ethanol industry. I don't know if my timeline is exactly right, but it seems like 20 plus years ago, these ethanol plants really started to show up in earnest, and it was pretty much like, hey, we make ethanol. I don't know what this stuff is coming out the back, but come pick it up. But we're in the ethanol business, and not to pick on the dairymen at all. It almost felt like until the last decade, 5 to 10 years in particular, the dairymen pretty much had the mindset that we make milk, and these Holstein bull calves are kind of a byproduct coming out the back door. Not to say that they didn't take reasonable care of them, but all of a sudden it's a completely different mindset. And so kind of going back to the ethanol, we all know that distillers' grains are a significant part of their financial program now. They put a lot of time and a lot of effort at marketing those distillers' grains. They've gotten a lot better at doing it. And I feel like the dairy industry is, in a sense, kind of the same. Dairymen are recognizing that this is not, quote unquote, a byproduct. We make milk, and whether we thought we were going to be or not, we are now in the beef industry, and in a pretty large way. So to me, it's as far as the, I don't know, what do we have, 9.3 million dairy cows in the U.S. I don't know that we see a lot more dairy cows. So at the end of the day, I mean, there is a limit to how many of these things that we can make. I think there's been a little bit, and I think maybe we're finding it. The pendulum always seems to swing too far, one way or the other, whether it be on replacement heifers in the beef cow herd, whether it be on replacement heifers in the dairy cow herd. There's been a lot of incentive for these guys to clip $700, $800, $900 head coupons. So there's been a lot of heavy black breedings. We hear from our clients all the time. In fact, we've had a number of calls over the last year, like, we're short on replacement heifers. We could use a few more replacement heifers. We could use a few more cows. So it'd be interesting to see where that equilibrium lies, but I don't expect the demand for the dairy industry to produce black-hided calves to be really any less than what it is right now, and or what their need for replacement heifers will bear. So that's my take on it.
I'll kind of touch on the health perspective, and I think you reach a point in your young career when you finally have something like, I remember when Holstein bull calves were being given away for free. When I was on staff at a large calf ranch, or on staff at a feed yard that had a large calf ranch, we were being paid to pick up these Holstein calves because there wasn't a market. And that switch in the industry really happened when packers put the pressure on not taking Holsteins anymore. That happened for a big portion of the industry earlier than some of the bigger players in the Holstein day-old business, but it really changed things and made people reevaluate what we do with that byproduct. From a health standpoint, it's a veterinarian's dream. From a welfare standpoint, it's my favorite piece to the puzzle. The Holsteins were not, the Holstein and Jersey bull calves were not always fed colostrum, not always managed appropriately. Now that they have value and we've brought that up to even the playing game, they are treated exactly as heifers. They are treated exactly like they should be. And so we really reduce some of that risk on the health side of things and get a lot more consistent feeding program further down the road because of their value from the day-old prices. I agree with Jason on the swinging. Right now we're seeing historical costs for replacing heifers. We're not really good at keeping dairy cows in a herd very long in the United States. We are good at milking cows and we're good at getting a lot of milk, but their longevity is not there. And that's also a beef byproduct of the dairy industry that is competition for the beef industry and complementary as well. So we have this ebb and flow of heifer replacement needs, and there's foreign market for our dairy replacement heifers that will affect the dairy on beef, but you won't see huge number swings, in my opinion.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for that. And I think for context, and correct me anybody if you know different, just in terms of numbers, I want to say that it might have been a cattle facts number that's like maybe 3 million head of dairy beef cattle this year, in those terms that they were projecting back at the beginning. And I think I heard Darrell Keel say that in terms of calf crop, about 26% of the calf crop would come from the dairy side, everything combined.
Yeah, I think, yeah, those numbers sound probably about right. I'm not familiar with the exact number, but one thing I guess to keep in mind from a beef perspective, and I think similar to Tera and David, uniquely, all three of us set up here with much of a heavier beef background. And it's I guess I didn't necessarily anticipate 10 or 12 years ago I would be pretty heavy into raising dairy replacement heifers, but love the aspect we got this this meshing of beef and dairy together. But I lost my train of thought as far as where I was going on replacement heifers, or excuse me, the beef on dairy crosses. Go ahead and ask your next question. I'll go back to that in a second.
Yeah. So the cow numbers, they've been pretty constant, 9 to 9.6 million since like year 2000. So the cow numbers are staying the same. We're getting more milk out of the cows, so that's similar to the beef, the produced. We're just figuring genetics is allowing us to do that. But from a dairy's perspective, if you think about those total numbers, we'll say back 55 to 60% will breed to heifers. So somewhere between 40 to 50% will go into beef on dairy on there. So you can start to figure out those numbers when you pull back. That's normally, I think, from from my viewpoint, the last few years, just because of these big coupons that you can sell a calf, day-old calf, for anywhere from $600 to $800. Well, it's incentivized these guys. That's been nice income because we've had low milk price the last couple of years. It's come back now, but people are realizing, oh, I need to save back more heifers. So I think there's going to be quite a bit more heifer retention or breeding, intentional breeding because of that. I don't know if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, thanks for bailing me out there, David. I remember what I was going to say. I guess from a comfort level, for lack of a better term, from a beef producer standpoint, you guys probably already know. I mean, the dairy industry's always been 20 to 25% of the beef industry. You know, that would be through coal cow feeding and/or Holstein bull or steer feeding. So really, at the end of the day, I mean, there could be some tweaking, some percentage changes here and there, but at the end of the day, it's not like there's this massive invasion that the dairy industry is making on the beef industry. They are a different hide color. They're a better product. They're a better feeding animal, better conversions than a Holstein bull calf. I think in some cases, heterosis, better health than a Holstein bull calf, and a better saleable, marketable meat product in the end of the day in the retail case. But at the end of the day, I guess I've got to remind myself sometimes that, hey, the dairy industry has always been close to a quarter of the beef industry through coal cow feeding and through Holstein bull calf feeding. And that inherently really hasn't changed. We've just made that 20 to 25% better. And instead of feed yards, if that's maybe all they did was specialize in feeding Holstein bull calves, we've probably made, not probably, I think these black-eyed beef on dairy cross calves have just become a lot more marketable. And now you've got mainstream beef finishing yards across the country, whether they specialize in Holstein bulls before or not, that are bidding for these animals and buying them and putting them in pens, in some cases right next door to a native beef animal. So I think that's all interesting too.
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, to me, the net as I understand it is, from a beef production standpoint, the contribution is relatively static. The quality of that production has gone up, and the efficiencies, etc. So, any questions at this point in time? Okay. Let me ask you, and given your experience on the beef side, the dairy side, and both, what opportunities have you seen dairy beef bring to the various industry sectors that you've seen or that you think you see out there that we haven't thought about yet?
Just a few things that come to mind right off is it's an easy source and age verification. You know, we put an EID tag in day one. We know the dam and the sour that they're bred to. So, and we can track them from day one. So if there's a value in the future for that, I don't see a lot of it now, but there is. The other thing is we're making these calves are coming every day. So it's a year-round process. So it's a consistent supply. So it's easier for us to either contract with someone that they're going to get a consistent supply of animals. So whereas me on my cow side, I calve 2 months out of the year, and that's just, so those calves just come once a year. So
one of the challenges I see with several of my producers is, and David alluded to it, the fact that we can track all the data is very powerful, but it also leaves opportunity for lack of doing anything with that data. And so I have some producers who, like a big dairy operation that milks 3,500 cows, might get excited about doing beef on dairy and adding that to their cash flow, but they're going to struggle to create the loads because they've only got 50% of their calves coming every day of the year. We're not creating the loads that are as unique or as consistent and close in weight by the end of so they need to combine with other dairies. Well, then if we increase the amount of sires in a group, we've lost consistency. And so we we risk doing the exact same thing that we struggle with in the beef industry, where we don't have consistent genetic background and things like that. Just because we know everything about these calves doesn't mean that we have the consistency built into the program, because not all dairies can create the loads like a larger dairy. And some of these are cooperator groups that work together or buy calves together, and that changes the game if we can get communication and data sharing across there. And that's where the power is, because then we can affect a lot of change from a health standpoint, from a genetic standpoint. We've seen a lot of value in looking at specific sires for feed efficiency when we look at big combined groups of similar sires. If you have a whole bunch of different sires going into the group, you'll never be able to create a decision to make.
Yeah, just to add to what David and Tera said, that's what I was going to mention, is the genetic side, just huge opportunity. And so the predictability of the numbers. I mean, you think about it in theory, not even really in theory, in reality. I mean, you could almost plan out 2 years in advance, from an end marketing standpoint, that, we're going to have this many thousand half brothers or half sisters, if you will, coming this week, probably within a 2 to 3 week time frame, that far out. That's very unique to a traditional, ranching scenario. They each have their places, but I think there's definitely some power in that. Talking about the genetic side of things, and we have certainly seen it, 7 years ago or so. The cliche comments get made that when the beef on dairy cross, really kind of started to come in the industry and started to raise its head, that there was a lot of cleaning out of the tanks, if you will, from semen companies. And not to point any fingers, all I know is what we saw as far as the quality of the animals, and there's no doubt about it, they have gotten significantly better. That has come and gone, that era, and so you've gone from that to semen companies realizing that this is real, this is very real. And once again, kind of talking like the old, ethanol distillers grains. Now, beef sales are a significant part of their sales going into dairies. There's a tremendous amount of focus being put on those genetics, I think, from all semen companies, and consequently, the quality of the animals just continues to get better. Right. That's right. Yeah.
It takes a lot more opportunities to get a dairy heifer pregnant that we struggle with, 4 and 5 weights that come to the feed yard from beef operations that shouldn't be pregnant. And then we struggle to get some of those girls pregnant on the dairy side, just from a genetic standpoint, that we've taught them how to milk and we've lost some reproductive efficiency. So it is a huge opportunity for those of you with seed stock portions of your business, that there will be a huge demand for really good semen as well, because it does take more straws per heifer than you'd be used to in the beef industry.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just kind of give I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, so the question was kind of what the housing arrangement is and or what the grouping size is, if that's fair to your question. So just kind of starting from the beginning, just kind of give a quick overview, and if you want to dive any deeper, but at least at our calf ranch, and it would vary, per facility, but I'd say generally speaking, we're probably pretty close in there. We spent about 90 days in a hutch. There are wooden hutches or California style hutches that are used a lot in facilities. There's also what they would call like a plastic or a poly hutch that can be purchased through a number of different avenues. We use the poly hutches. It's individual animal housing. So it's a white plastic, almost looks like a big white poly dog house, if you will, with a wire panel out front. So they've got a small area. They could be inside or outside. We use a lot of bedding. Animals are bedded. They've got, of course, obviously got fresh grain, starter grain and water, and then delivered milk for about the first 60 days of their life. and then we wean those calves off the milk, more into the grain diet. We can talk more about that later, but sticking more to your question, at 90 days, we move our animals, what we call our transition barns, which are basically, we probably use the term barn loosely, but it's basically kind of a 35-foot mono-slope roof line. We do have a curtain structure at the back that can be raised or lowered. We got about a 3.5% slope from the back of the pen up to the front, so it's a good, well-drained pen. So they go from single family housing in a hutch. They get picked up at 90 days of age. We weigh them. They get individual animal weights. Of course, as David and Tera talked about, all EID tags, so that all gets recorded. Then we move those into those pens in those transition barns. So each individual pen, we typically put like 24 animals in a pen. And those pens are going to be 30 foot wide by 90 foot deep. And they're going to spend about 60 days in that environment. And then for about 30 days after that, we're maybe a little bit unique in this. We move them to what we call a windbreak and a shade pen. And at that point, they go into groups of about 100 and probably about 150 more or less. So just another progression of, you go from 1 to 24 to 150. It's a pretty big jump, but they get a lot more square footage. They go from about 100 square foot per animal to about 200 in that environment. And then we've got big guardrail windbreaks, and we've also got a roof line at the north cross fence of that pen, and then we bed heavily underneath there as weather dictates. When they move at 90 days on a beef on dairy cross, they're probably going to be close to 240 to 250. When they move out of the calf ranch in general, we run our heifers for 180 days. We run our beef animals for 165. We're probably a little long on our beef animals. A lot of operations do it for 150. So our animals are weighing about 450, 470 here as of recent, coming out of the calf ranch about 165 days of age. So they're doing around all farms average together a little over a 2. Our better third of farms are probably doing about a 2.3, 2.35 from day one all the way through the calf ranch. And then once they get out of those windbreak and shade pens, then at that point they're weighing over 500 pounds clearly, and then they're just going into an open lot, typical feedlot style pen, or in most cases they're getting moved off our operation at that point in time. They're going on to a feedlot operation, grow yard, etc. So.
The big points that Jason brought up are very similar across facilities that I see. The major challenges come in when we move those cattle out of those different systems if we're not paying attention to what they were in previously. So we have single animal housing going to group animal housing. You have to go slow at that. You cannot jump them up to 100 head. That's too much social pressure on those animals and you'll have a health wreck. Then you move them into a bigger group, get them ready for their loads to go out. The biggest thing to pay attention to is I have some calf ranches that are bunk broke at that point and eating out of a typical bunk, and some calf ranches that those calves are used to eating off of very similar to dairy cows, so the feed is pushed up to them. It doesn't matter. I see really good results in both of those systems. It's that next phase of production when you stress them socially and move them to a feed yard, and you need to know what they came out of and how you can change the pen landscape and how they can they reach the bunk. A lot of our feed yards aren't made for that height of a calf. And so that's where I see some of my clients have really good success going to a grow yard that has the ability to feed just a little bit smaller calf and raise them up to that 650 pound mark and then sell those to a typical feed yard. So I pay more attention to what we're moving them out of and not forgetting that at the end of the day, we may have raised them completely differently as calves, but they're still cattle. And so the very simple husbandry acts of bedding them down, making sure that the water tank is clean and that they know how to drink out of it is huge, because if they go from a calf ranch where they have the little bobble tanks and then they're going to Johnson tanks and you notice a mismatch in height, they're really going to struggle with that. So you have to really know where you're getting your calves and what system they're in to be able to predict your success with health, because if they can't eat and drink, that's like the basis of most of our challenges. And it seems like really basic, but that's the majority of what we fix is what system did they come out of and what system are they going into. I think our consumer, it's worth noting, our consumer is going to struggle with single calf housing in the future. They already do. It's just what are we going to do about it and how nimble are we going to be about changing it? So the group housing in baby calves is going to become bigger. It's hard to imagine that at a calf ranch the size that we deal with out in Southwest Kansas, because I can intensely manage a single animal and know every single animal that refuses a bottle and give them attention. I can't do that in a group setting on as large of a scale as we do. So I think we have to be cognizant of what our consumer is going to ask of us in the future with single calf housing, but we also need to know the benefits of the welfare we are providing them now, and just step up that game and say, this is why we have to do that, and we have to have good bedding, and we have to change that out or have that look a certain way, so that maybe we can pull that consumer along with us on their main challenge being single calf housing. They don't like it.
Okay, thank you. And that was a great question. Here's another one back here. Okay, so the health aspects, if you will, of the dairy calves versus the dairy beef calves, is that? Okay.
In my experience, the dairy beef calves are larger birth weight, first of all, which can be a blessing because they're more vigorous and we get them eating a higher quantity of feed and milk faster. So we have a calf that can withstand winter, a calf that can withstand heat stress that we put them through out in Southwest Kansas. And so they are bigger, but with dystocia, we do see increased issues in not only calf mortality, but what I focus on is that 0 to 7 day calf health. You can't really blame the calf ranch if we're really struggling to get these calves delivered in the maternity barn and we start them out, you know, their acid-base balance isn't right from the beginning because they really struggled during birth. And so we have to go back and really train our employees to think about these calves differently and attend those cows differently, and maybe mark the cows that are going to be dairy on beef so that we're watching them, because they can have those dairy replacement heifers without any trouble most days of the week, but some of these do cause some dystocia issues. We see a more vigorous calf throughout the whole period, so less death loss when you compare straight Holstein to dairy on beef in that phase, in the hutch, in the weaning pens, and then I think I definitely appreciate it at the feed yard as well, especially when you take into account adverse weather events. So they handle behaviorally, which is interesting because they're raised in the exact same manner, they handle behaviorally adverse weather more appropriately and more logically than a Holstein ever will. And so we really struggle with some of those Holstein calves in high mortality events just because they don't handle a snowstorm or wind or even some heat stress events the same way as our beef on dairy.
Does that answer your question?
So the question was, what's being done to manage liver abscesses?
So we're all probably going to have different answers. So I think we all ought to say something here. Just from our experience, you know, the straight Holstein steer is put on a high energy ration day one. They just try to just get him, because he was made to just have the frame and try to keep the frame down. They had to get the pounds on him. So that led us to think, okay, that's where the liver abscesses come from, in my opinion, is just the rations that we feed them and how intense we do it. So all Holsteins or all dairy animals have bad abscesses with the stigma 5-6 years ago. So as we worked with it, and we think it starts at the calf ranch. It goes calf ranch as well as the back or the stalker area. You know, when you're growing them, you have to be a little slower. You got to have a little more roughage. You just can't push them as hard. And we found that if we can just slow them down a little bit, we can get compensatory gain when they're ready. And our experience is we've been able to get down to 10% abscesses, just similar with our 100% beef. So it's been very comparable, but there's still the stigma within the industry, especially at the packing plants, that, you know, we don't want beef dairy cross because that's what they just have that in their mind. So
the stigma affects us a lot, I think, and some of that leads to a lot of frustration from my standpoint because I'm innately wanting to solve problems, and we only get information returned from that end user when they deem it a problem, right? And so when it's a problem, it's our problem. But when it's an industry issue and we're losing offal and we're losing what we think is good animal welfare there in the final feeding phase, we're not sharing information and we're not being proactive about it. And that's very frustrating for me as a veterinarian, because if I don't get consistent, it looks so variable. I don't know where to go with it. We have pins that do 10% and do great, and then you'll have a pin that blows up at 60% liver abscess. Those you get calls on, right? I would expect a call on that, but without shared information and shared attention to solving the actual problem and getting down to the nitty gritty, we're not gonna get anywhere, and we're gonna be spinning our wheels for a while until we get there. One thing I will put a plug in for K-State College of Vet Med. We did a pretty extensive study with them. I think it's in preprint. It's not quite published, but we did not find liver abscesses in the calf ranch growing phase at all. And so for whatever reason, I don't disagree with you at all, David. I do think that what we do at the calf ranch has a major effect on the outcome at the packing plant. But for whatever reason, we're not seeing that on necropsy, and they did thousands of calves and really categorized those. We found one liver abscess in all of the calves that they did, and they did necropsies like a good vet student would do, not a peekaboo situation. They really took the time to figure out what the cause of death was, and we just did not recognize a solution to the problem in the calf ranch phase while still understanding that we potentially affect it in the slaughterhouse. Yeah, they just had to cut the deads that were available. So yes, not a controlled study, but more categorizing. The goal of the study was to categorize cause of death, and really by days on feed at the calf ranch, because there's not a lot of published data on what we see different challenges when we talk about moving those calves from the hutches to the weaning pens, and just getting some of that groundwork built. The Beef Cattle Institute started that project, and it's probably going to keep growing because there's interest there.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with both of you guys as far as the stigma and yeah, the fact that, hey, anytime you have a 350-pound animal on feed for nearly a year on a hot finishing diet, there's probably going to be some liver abscesses. Primarily, I guess the reason I brought up our headcount numbers earlier is because I just want to be clear that although we're growing that segment, our beef on dairy crosses are a smaller part of our operation. And because of that, just from a production cattle flow standpoint, just to be frank about it, we treat all of our beef on dairy crosses just like we would a Holstein heifer. So we're probably a little bit of an experiment in that regard. Our clients don't share the information with us. All I know is they keep sending us animals and keep paying for us to do it. But where I'm going with that is we feed a little bit more milk. We're a little bit more roughage base in our diets. There's certainly ways that you can get beef on dairy cross calves to the same weight that we do quicker with less milk, which involves less dollars, and get onto that heavier, higher concentrate grain diet earlier. But, you know, by the time our animals are 105, 110 days old, we have them on a TMR, we have them on silage, we have them on, you know, ground alfalfa, more akin to a dairy animal. They do have good gains. I guess I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. Does that have an impact, you know, versus less days at the calf ranch on a higher concentrate diet? Who knows? I'm sure we will learn more as an industry going forward. You know, one other thing, and I think Tera and David have both touched on this too, what that dairy does and I think even go back to liver abscesses, the way that these dairies manage those animals in the first 24, 36, 48 hours of life is imperative. We've got a full-time person on our staff. She lives up in Minnesota, and we believe in enough. I mean, we pay her to invest in her time just to go to our dairies and work with the maternity areas. And it's friendly fire, but, you know, she works with their maternity managers. She's testing for cleanliness. She's doing colostrum testing, but good, clean colostrum in those calves and being born and brought into the world in a good, clean environment sets us up for success. That, you know, we can either thrive on that for the next, you know, year plus those animals' lives, or fight it all the way. So it's a short 24 to 48 hour period, but and guys dive in if I'm overemphasizing this, but it is huge. So they can either make the calf ranch, consequently all the way through the feed yard, look like a really good manager and a hero, or those animals can take a lot more management and still not end up being the full potential of what they could be.
Dale? And so if you would just repeat.
So Galen asked, and each dairy is different, but what do dairies do? When do they sell their calves? And do they retain ownership? So we've done it across the board. Right now we're selling them right off the cow day old when they pick them up. And that's just because the price is so good and we don't have enough to really justify. In the past, we've retained ownership all the way through. And we've also found that get them to 7 weights and selling them at 7 weights has been really good for us, and letting the feedlot go ahead and finish them. Day old is by the head, and they want to know whether it's a Holstein beef cross or a Jersey Holstein cow bred to beef. And most of ours are Jersey Holstein, so we get less with that Jersey cross. They're just a smaller animal, and they don't gain as good.
I see a little bit of all of it, but a vast majority of the straight Holstein male calves in the calf ranch are leaving at 350 because there's really only a couple of markets that can tolerate those in a couple areas of the country. And then I see clients do that 350, which is usually about 4 to 5 months of age, and then we have the 6 weights that we sell. I'll tell you what my feed yards really don't like getting is the 9 weights. So anything previous to 9 is good to get to the feed yard, but after 9, it's pretty hard to make a closeout look good on a beef on dairy.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, like you said, 350 on the Holsteins, 400 to 700 pounds, or 350 to 700 pounds on the beef on dairy cross. Is a lot more flexibility there as far as marketing windows.
Okay, thank you. Good question. To kind of follow up on that, I never hear about, and we had this discussion a little bit earlier, David, is, you know, I never hear about grazing dairy beef cattle. Maybe they do. I don't know. So I guess my question is kind of all wrapped together is, for folks here, grow cattle, right? is there an opportunity with dairy beef? If I'm a stalker backgrounder, is there an opportunity, or contracted with somebody that needs more space, whatever, or is it just very much integrated calf ranch to here, and it's closed loop, if you will?
Sure. Briefly, I don't think a lot of that has been attempted yet. The attempts are the guys that have put some beef on dairy crosses out to pasture, and take this with a grain of salt, but I don't think initially the results have been, I think they've been a little disappointing from what I've understood to some native beef animals. Tera mentioned earlier, just kind of some of that instinctual DNA from a dairy base or a Holstein versus even the beef on dairy crosses. There is some improvement with the beef on dairy crosses a little bit as far as weather, that type of thing. I think similarly from a grazing behavior standpoint, there maybe isn't quite, the instinctual behavior with a half dairy animal to go out there and graze as well as a native beef animal. Once again, take that with a big grain of salt, because maybe there's going to be some studies, or maybe some of you guys are going to put some of these out this summer or have. I guess maybe we'd ask the audience for some input. Be a great opportunity for that. But go ahead, David. You might have some experience.
We could write a book on, I'm just going to mention my soapbox on this. You take them out of a system in which they've been confined their entire life. Is that the best decision for that animal to stumble around and try to figure out how to be a grazing animal for the first time in its life when it is very at risk for health events? And that's when that happens. And without like a really good set of mean mama cows to protect them and teach them how to go around a fence and manage to put their head down and graze and get to work, I have big reservations on the welfare impact of those animals and whether that's a good idea. And I have a lot of data that would show they spend a lot of time not eating and not gaining weight to figure it out, and I don't think it's worth it. But what was your experience, David?
Exactly what she said. It's a disaster. I mean, they don't know how to, they walk in this knee-high wheat pasture wondering what it is, wondering when you're going to bring the feed truck. So it's not good. Their hooves aren't ready for it and anything like that. I mean, there's a lot of negatives about it. We tried it because I mean, wheat pasture, that's a perfect feed you can give them. But yeah, we were trying to herd them with horses, and they looked at it and just ran. So after about 5 or 6 miles of trying to get around them and finally getting them in the wheat pasture, well, it's a disaster. Don't do it.
I had a client call me one time like, hey, we put 200 head out on this wheat pasture. I'm like, you did what? And what is our plan? And it was one of those like, Dr. Barnhardt, figure it out. Like, they're out there. Good luck. And it wasn't fun.
So and I'll let you guys jump in here quickly, but if I understand your question correctly, you're talking about the timing of implants, days of growing. Yeah, I don't have any real input on that. I don't know if you guys do.
I have a license to lose, so I'm pretty careful right now with what the FDA is putting out there. I'm going to wait till they settle down before I would make an opinion on that.
I think it's just like you're saying, we're all trying to figure it out.
So first, kind of rations through each phase, makeup, prescription, and relative health impact.
Yeah, up until about a year ago, our diets in the buckets in front of the calf hutches, our corn basis was steam flake corn, and what we found is although steam flake corn would be at the top of the food chain more or less as far as starch availability, which is good for rumen development, but as far as the opportunity for fines to be created and that additional moisture to kind of have a spoiling type effect, particularly through the summer months. I'm even surprised to be saying this, but we actually went back to a whole corn as far as that goes. Lower starch availability, but intake and consumption trumped that and was better. So that is a combination of a whole corn diet, a commercial calf pellet that we get blended or get made on a custom basis, whole cottonseed, loose cottonseed hulls, and then a molasses fat blend. And so that's about for the first 50 days. And then we'll actually start to add in just a little bit of long stem roughage, maybe a little bit of ground oat hay or triticale hay on the last 30 or 40 days in the hutch. Then we move that diet with them, just one less thing for them to adapt to as we go into those transition barns. So they'll have that diet in front of them at the feeding curve, if you will, for about the first 14 days. And then we start to morph into a TMR diet. Our silage typically, when I say silage, we typically ratio about 2/3 corn silage and a third, either about 2/3 corn silage and about a third triticale as a silage portion of the diet. We are going to have some soy hull pellets in there. There would be some ground alfalfa in there. There would be some dry distillers grains in there. Steam flake corn now, and liquid supplement. Those diets, the hutch diets, are going to run around 20% protein. And then our diets, as they go through that next growing phase, are going to range from 18 down to about 15% protein towards the latter end of that. From an energy standpoint, if this means anything to anybody, typically we're going to be kind of from the upper 50s from a net energy for gain standpoint, kind of getting down to the low to mid 50s as they get kind of through that growth phase. So once again, trying to balance a good thrifty rate of gain, but not really putting the coals to them yet, if that answers your question.
I pay a lot less attention to what's being offered and make sure that it's being offered in a way that's appropriate from my standpoint. So just from my view of contrast that with a typical commercial cattle feedlot, I don't even step over the feed bunk with crap on my boots, right? Like, I'm very careful with what's available in that bunk. And contrast that to the calf ranch, we're doing a lot right there at the face of that, where that we want that calf to have the confidence to stick their head out and eat every day. we're dropping a bottle in that leaks milk sometimes. We're cleaning water every single day. We're dumping feed into another bucket they got to figure out. We're giving our vaccines right there. You know, we're putting a lot of stress on those animals right where we want them to eat. And so when they do have the confidence to stick their head out there and they're hungry, it needs to be high quality, it needs to be clean and fresh, and it needs to be there when they're hungry. And so I pay a lot more attention to that than the specifics that Jason would get into on his role.
Did that answer that question? And how about on the corn, what you want to go back to?
Yeah, as Tara said, she's absolutely right. And giving that animal the best experience possible, and that's part of the reason. And to each their own. There's good calf ranches, you know, all various parts of the country that probably do it different ways. Calves, they don't like fines. I mean, there's just no two ways around that. And so even though you might have something that on paper is nutritionally superior, if they don't eat it as well, they don't have as good experience, it becomes kind of a moot point. So we've kind of gotten away a little bit more from the higher process to clear to the other end of the spectrum, lower the fines, just make sure the intake is good, and there seems to be plenty of time to get more starch into them as that opportunity presents itself. Yeah, so we don't feed any Thailand. We do use, we do have a micro machine, and so we do use Bovatec and Rumensin from an ionophore standpoint. You know, we use varying degrees of you know, chelated trace minerals, et cetera. Some of that comes through the liquid supplement package I mentioned earlier. Some of it's being direct through the micro machine. Same.
I think there was another question. Yep, here's a question back here.
We have to keep on that 24/7, 365 at the dairy, and it's not because it's not top of mind. That is always the emphasis. It's that we can't control the other factors. So we get 2 inches of rain, and there's crap in the colostrum, right? And dirty colostrum kills calves. And so I would say over the course of my career, colostrum quality has increased 2x. It is a different ball game now, but the genetics of the dairy cow have changed a lot, and we get really high quality IgG levels in our colostrum compared to what I used to experience earlier in my career. So I don't have to worry as much about quality colostrum being produced by the cow. It's fluctuations in volume, and can the volume that we're getting from the cows sustain how many calves need fed that colostrum. I really want 2 feedings of colostrum while those calves are in the maternity barn, and that ensures that they have dry navels, and it ensures that they are dry and ready for transport, so that we're not transporting wet calves and we're not transporting calves that haven't had a full feeding. I wouldn't be mad if farms had the volume availability to throw another feeding at those calves, because we don't get paid well enough for colostrum to go off the farm in any other way than in a calf's belly, in my opinion. I wouldn't even be mad if they threw that 3rd feeding right before they loaded the truck to the calf ranch as whole milk, because we have to think about transportation stress on these 24-hour-old calves. And that is the beautiful thing about raising them in the area that we're raising them, is we can get out of some of the winter stress and the challenges, but it comes at the cost of having to transport those calves at an age we're maybe not as comfortable with. The dairy industry will respond to that, right? Anytime there's a challenge, we'll respond to it and adjust what we do. So you'll see popping up of what we call calf depots, where they will gather calves for 7 days and then kind of do an all in, all out of the depot to bring them to Southwest Kansas twice a week or something like that. There's challenges in that from an animal health standpoint, regulatory standpoint. You want to think about calves that were born on a dairy, went to a depot, then came to a calf ranch, and that's going to make our state veterinarian go, whoa, we've got to have a lot of documentation of that. We have to figure out how to manage that information transfer because it's so important to be able to trace these calves back from a marketing standpoint, but also from a disease traceability standpoint. And so colostrum could not be overstated on its importance, and it has to be constantly managed because I will have farms that do a phenomenal job and run a 0.7% duck loss in their hutch phase of the calf ranch and do great. And then for whatever reason this summer, either weather, flies, whatever we want to call it, we'll have it blow up and they have 14% duck loss in that phase. And we've always got to be able to go back to the maternity barn and ensure that things are clean and things are getting adequate colostrum. And you want to talk about a job on the dairy that is the hardest job. These men and women have to attend a lot of cows. And if you've ever been on a dairy, we always say like on several of our dairies, there's a calf born every 30 minutes. We actually wish it came every 30 minutes. It's usually like 6 at once, and then you sit around for a couple hours, and then there's 12. And so the work is difficult, and they're long days, and they're 12-hour shifts. So we struggle with managing that particular part of the dairy. But the calf ranch has a big investment in that going well, like Jason said.
Yeah, and I think those of us that are producers know that just what Tera said, the importance, I should say Dr. Barnhardt, I'm sorry, that we know the importance of high quality colostrum, and we test all ours and just make sure they get it within the first hour of their life and get the second one. And if we're able to, we'll do a third before the trailer gets there. So.
Does that answer your question back there before we move on? Okay, Dale?
I don't know what it is. I'd say genetics probably has a lot to do with it.
Genetics and managing the feed bunk in that close-up period is huge. I've seen a lengthened close-up ration time, more to address the metabolic challenges on the cow. And then the added bonus is better, healthier calves because they struggle less with dystocia, and we have a metabolically appropriate mama cow coming in to deliver a calf. And so I do think, when I first started out of vet school, DAs were really common to go and fix and do a lot of surgery. And now I have farms that I'd be embarrassed if I had to go do a DA there. I'd have to YouTube it first because I haven't done one in so long. So we would struggle. I can't believe I just admitted that in public. So you guys, I will go do a DA this weekend, probably 20 of them now because I just jinxed myself. But that management of the close-up cow, and for those of you, the lingo, sorry if that gets confusing, is that period after the cow has been dried off and she is being pulled up closer to the parlor, is why we name it the close-up, and she's closer to calving, and we change that diet to really adjust for her metabolic needs in that period of time. And I think that has been lengthened in my experience on a lot of farms.
Okay, that answer that. Any other questions to this point? Okay, I'm going to back up a little bit because after that ringing endorsement for grazing dairy beef calves, I don't think we got back to, I was also wondering about, is there opportunity for background in beef dairy calves, or is that pretty much entwined with calf ranches, et cetera? I mean, is there a need for it? Is there something out there? It's like, man, we sure could use some people who know what they're doing to grow these at a certain stage.
Yeah, I guess in my opinion, yeah, I think there's a real opportunity for growing and backgrounding beef on dairy cross calves. As David and Dr. Tera mentioned earlier, there is a range that these feedlots are acceptable to take the animals, typically on the beef on dairy cross, usually from 400 to 700 pounds. But a lot of them do like them at a little 6 to 7 weights, a little more manageable, a little safer animal coming in from a health standpoint. And so there's a lot of calf ranches out there that are, I mean, they're a 5-month program or a 6-month program. That's it. We do some growing and backgrounding for some of our clients as they desire to, but I think there's a need. I think there's a segment out there for a fair amount of these calves to go from 400 to 600 or 700 pounds, depending on what the feedlots are looking for.
A big portion of my clientele is smaller grow yards that take them from, because most of my calf ranches run out of space at 400. They don't, we got to get them out of there. We're not built to handle a larger animal, and we're not mentally capable of doing it just because we have the system set up to go there. I get along really well with that 4 to 6 weight animal from a health standpoint. Wise, if you treat them like cattle, I have a hard time convincing people that they still benefit from bedding and they still benefit from long stem hay. And there's a lot of guys that will argue with me that, well, they don't need to learn how to eat hay. Well, they still get stressed out on a truck, and they're still cattle at the end of the day that want to nest down and rest after even, I have 45-mile haul cattle that nest down in good bedding, and I can see a lot of difference in the health outcomes of that. So that window is huge with opportunity. Bid early and bid often on those cattle at 350 to 4 and go with it, but make sure you're ready to handle them. And you're very well equipped as people who raise beef cattle, because we've got to treat these animals a little bit more like a beef animal and be careful with their nutrition, because they don't need what a beef animal needs as far as transition, but they do need that husbandry.
Any other questions? I, for one, think this has just been a dynamite discussion. And so before I close, is there anything that we haven't brought up that you all would like to comment on?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, admittedly, our baseline is a Holstein replacement heifer, and our beef on dairies are growing, so that is our default. So that's kind of that's our world, right? I mean, we're used to latches being open and things happening. Like, how did that happen? Yeah, so that's just kind of our world, so to speak.
Lots of different modifications to keep the wheels on the bus, is what I would say. But the biggest modification I notice is in employees. You need an employee that appreciates the fact that these are beef on dairy animals, and that can be very difficult to accomplish with somebody with a native cattle mind. And not saying either people are wrong. It's easier for me to take a group of we have a lot of T and visa veterinarians working on a lot of my farms, and they come from Mexico. They have a background in veterinary medicine. They have a degree in veterinary medicine, but they cannot get licensed in the United States because they don't quite have the same qualifications here. But at some point in their life, they said, I care about animals. I want to take care of animals. Those are the trainable people that I want to work with, because I can go back and erase a lot of, hey, you're not going to see very much bloat, and you're really just going to deal with pink eye and respiratory. So we can simplify our protocols. We can get them to do animal handling the way we want to do it. It's really hard to take someone who's used to being horseback and take their horse out from underneath them, basically. And it's not only hard, it's impossible with some people. And that is, stay on the horse. We have plenty of pin rider jobs, but you may not make a very good pin walker, and that's how we have to adjust. Is you have to approach those cattle on foot. You have to single them out of the pen, and sometimes you can get by with, treating them because they have no flight zone. They're wonderful to work with if you have people who understand that they don't have a flight zone. You kind of need to build processing barns to make sense with a beef on dairy animal. They can run through native processing barns, but you need to have adjustments available. So I am a big proponent or enjoy my facilities that have a bud box that we can kind of make smaller and get it down, adjustable alleyways, things like that. So it's not impossible. It's definitely something to consider, and have someone with some experience with beef on dairy to say, hey, have you thought about this? The gate modifications that people have come up with, I have hundreds of pictures, and if you find one that is Jersey proof, let me know, and we should get it to some people to market it, because you could probably make some money on that.
That last comment's what I got. You just got to keep trying and just put them back in and try something different.
Anything else? If not, let's thank these folks for their information.